Ever feel like the Christmas story we hear every year is just uh, like the tip of the iceberg, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Like there's this whole other like hidden depth to it that we're kind of missing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, today we're diving deep into the tale of the wise men. And trust me, it's way more complex and fascinating than you might think.
It really is amazing how much richer the story becomes when we kind of look beyond those familiar verses
Right.
and we explore the historical context, all those alternative narratives that didn't quite make it into the Bible.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. Most people just assume the wise men are in all the Gospels,
Right.
but they're not.
Yeah,
They're only mentioned in Matthew.
that's right.
And here's another one, another shocker. They never even encounter the shepherds.
That's right. Matthew and Luke each had their own audience
Yeah.
and their own purpose when they sat down to write their Gospels. Matthew was writing primarily for a Jewish audience, focusing on Jesus's Jewish identity, his lineage, while Luke, writing for a more Gentile audience, really emphasizes that universal appeal of Jesus's message.
Fascinating. Now, Matthew uses this interesting word for the wise men,
Yeah,
Magi.
right?
It's where we get the word magic.
Hmm.
So were these guys more like priests,
Yeah.
advisors, or straight up sorcerers?
Well, picture a blend of all three.
Okay.
These magi were an elite priestly caste in ancient Persia. They were responsible for religious rituals, for preserving wisdom, and even, get this, for interpreting the stars.
Wow.
A pretty powerful combination, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of stars, was the Star of Bethlehem like a real astronomical event or just a metaphor?
Yeah.
Was there really like a bright light in the sky guiding these magi to baby Jesus?
Well, there is evidence of a significant comet appearing around 4 BCE,
Really?
which some astronomers believe could have been the Star of Bethlehem. But it's also important to remember that the star serves a very clever narrative purpose. It actually subverts Roman propaganda at the time.
Roman propaganda.
Mhm.
Tell me more.
Well, you see, Emperor Augustus, the Roman emperor at the time, used a comet to claim divine lineage.
Wow.
He was basically saying, look, the heavens have confirmed my divine right to rule. But Matthew's star very cleverly refocuses that power onto Jesus.
So it's like Matthew is saying, no, the real Son of God is Jesus, not the Roman emperor.
Exactly. It's a subtle but powerful challenge to Roman authority, and it wouldn't have been lost on Matthew's audience at the time.
I'm starting to see how much deeper this story goes. Okay, another question that's always bugged me is why 3 wise men? Everyone always pictures 3.
Well, here's another surprise. Matthew never actually mentions a number.
What?
Nope. It's the 3 gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, that influenced later interpretations. 3 gifts.
Okay.
Therefore, 3 gift givers.
I see.
But there could have been 2 or 12 or even 20. We just don't know.
Wow, I had no idea. Like a historical puzzle. But you have to admit, those 3 gifts are pretty significant, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What do they symbolize?
Those gifts are at the heart of the story. They represent key aspects of Jesus' life and Matthew's theological message. Gold, of course, represents kingship. It's an acknowledgement of Jesus as a king, even though he wasn't born into, royalty.
So it's a challenge to like those traditional ideas of power and authority.
Exactly. Then you have frankincense. This fragrant resin was used in religious rituals, so it signifies divinity, recognizing Jesus as the Son of God.
Okay. And what about myrrh? Isn't that a bit of a downer?
Myrrh was a resin used for embalming.
Right.
So it does foreshadow Jesus' eventual sacrifice and death. It points towards his ultimate purpose as Savior.
It's a lot of symbolism packed into 3 gifts. It really makes you think. Now, we see the 3 wise men depicted in art all the time, but were they always portrayed as we see them today, in those fancy robes, their gifts held high?
Interestingly, the earliest depictions, dating back to the 2nd century, show them in distinctly Persian clothing.
Oh, wow.
Long tunics, baggy trousers, those distinctive Phrygian caps.
So not quite the regal figures we see in, like, Renaissance paintings.
Not at all. And that's a fascinating detail because it contrasts sharply with how Romans often depicted their defeated enemies.
Yeah.
Like the Parthians, for example. They were usually shown kneeling, subjugated. But in these early Christian depictions, the wise men representing Persia, they stand tall, paying homage to Jesus.
So even in art, there's a subtle pushback against Roman dominance.
Precisely. And as Christianity gained acceptance, these depictions became more elaborate, more prominent. Think of the stunning mosaics in Ravenna, for example,
Right.
where the wise men are named and shown in all their Persian splendor.
Yeah.
It's a powerful visual reminder of how their journey challenged the established order and pointed to a new kind of kingdom.
It's amazing how art and history just intertwine like that. But you mentioned earlier that Matthew never specifies 3 wise men.
That's right.
Where did that number come from then?
It all comes down to the gifts. 3 gifts led to the assumption of 3 gift givers.
Okay.
But Matthew never explicitly states a number.
So there could have been more than 3.
There could have been 2, 12, 20. We just don't know.
Wow.
And that's where those apocryphal gospels and other non-canonical texts come in.
Right.
They offer fascinating alternative perspectives on the story.
Okay, before we dive into those,
Yeah.
you mentioned apocryphal gospels, and I think some of our listeners might be wondering what those are. Could you explain?
Sure. You can think of apocryphal gospels as alternate versions of the Christmas story or even the Bible as a whole.
Right.
They were written around the same time as the canonical gospels, but they weren't included in the official Bible.
Gotcha.
They offer a glimpse into those diverse beliefs and interpretations that were circulating in the early Christian communities.
So they're like the director's cut of the Christmas story.
Exactly. They offer a fascinating glimpse into that richness and complexity of early Christian thought.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What are some of the most interesting alternative versions out there? I'm ready for some surprises.
Well, there's one story where Mary gives the wise men baby Jesus's swaddling cloths as a gift.
Folly.
And these cloths miraculously survive a fire, becoming holy relics. Talk
Yeah.
about a powerful symbol of faith.
Wow, that's incredible.
Hmm.
And you mentioned something about a tradition with 12 wise men.
Yes. A Syrian tradition actually presents 12 wise men, each bearing gifts, representing a wider acceptance of Jesus' message.
Wow,
It's a fascinating expansion of that familiar narrative.
this is amazing. It really challenges our assumptions about the story and makes you wonder how many other versions might be out there. But before we get too carried away, I have to ask, why are figures from another religion, Zoroastrianism, so central to this Christian narrative? I mean, the wise men weren't Christians, right?
That's a great question. I think it speaks to the historical and cultural connections between Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and early Christianity.
Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. Zoroastrianism, an ancient Persian religion, actually had a significant influence on both Judaism and early Christianity,
Okay.
particularly in terms of ideas about good and evil, a single God, and the concept of a Messiah.
So Matthew might have been drawing on those shared threads to kind of create a more universal message.
Exactly. One that resonated with both Jewish and Gentile audiences.
Yeah.
He was demonstrating that Jesus' message was for everyone,
Right.
not just a select few.
So it's not just a story about Jesus, but a story about the interconnectedness of different faiths and cultures.
Absolutely. It highlights those shared human experiences, those spiritual yearnings that transcend religious boundaries, which is pretty relevant even today, wouldn't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so we've got Matthew's version, apocryphal gospels, 12 wise men, fireproof swaddling cloth. Is there anything else we're missing?
Well, we can't forget the historical context. We need to remember that this story unfolded within the Roman Empire, which was actively promoting emperor worship, presenting their rulers as divine figures.
And the early Christians weren't exactly on board with that, were they?
Not at all. They saw Jesus as the true Son of God.
Right.
And they used this story of the wise men, these esteemed figures from a rival empire, to subtly undermine Roman authority and affirm their own beliefs.
It's almost like a coded message,
Mm-hmm.
a way to express their beliefs without directly challenging the powers that be.
Precisely. It's a testament to their ingenuity and resilience.
It really makes you appreciate the layers of meaning embedded in these stories. It's
Yeah.
like peeling back an onion,
Yeah.
each layer revealing something new and surprising.
Absolutely. And that's what makes exploring these ancient texts and traditions so rewarding. There's always something new to discover.
Yeah.
Another layer to peel. It really highlights how these ancient stories, they still resonate with us.
Yeah.
And how they invite us to question what we think we know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's so much history just hiding in plain sight. And speaking of things that might be hiding in plain sight, let's talk about those camels.
Ooh, yeah.
When did they make their grand entrance into the story?
Yes. Those camels, they swagger in around the 4th century,
Really?
adding a touch of visual flair, I guess you could say, to the scene.
So no camels in the original text?
Nope. Matthew makes no mention of camels whatsoever. They
Yeah.
actually appear around the same time as, well, a whole menagerie of animals starts popping up in nativity scenes.
Oh, really?
Oxen, asses, you name it. But there's something about a caravan of wise men, A&D camels,
Yeah.
that really captures the imagination.
It's quite a visual. Okay, let's get back to those mysterious magi.
Yeah,
Matthew doesn't mention their origin,
right.
but most scholars assume they're from Persia, right?
Right. Matthew simply says Magi from the east.
Okay.
But by that time, Persia was the dominant power in the east. They were the thorn in Rome's side, so to speak. His audience would have immediately thought of Persia.
So these magi, they were more than just priests, right? I mean, they seem to have held a very special position in Persian society.
Oh, absolutely. They were the keepers of ancient Persian traditions,
Yeah.
the guardians of their sacred texts, their rituals. Imagine them chanting ancient hymns, performing elaborate purification ceremonies, maintaining the sacred fire.
Right.
That was so central to their faith. They were born into this elite caste responsible for upholding the core principles of Zoroastrianism: truth, good deeds, and good thoughts.
Wow, it sounds like they were just steeped in wisdom and ritual.
Yeah.
But didn't the word magi also carry like connotations of magic? I mean, even today we use that word.
You're right. The Greek word magi is indeed related to our word magic.
All right.
And in the Roman world, these magi, they were often seen as possessing, supernatural powers. They were shrouded in this aura of mystery and even a bit of fear, to be honest. And honestly, from a historical perspective, it's difficult to completely separate what we call religion from magical practices.
Right.
They were often intertwined.
So they were priests, wise men, magicians, and then eventually kings. When did that royal title come about?
The king designation didn't actually appear until much later,
Really?
around the 12th century. It's thanks to Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa.
Okay.
Legend has it that he discovered the wise men's bones
Oh.
and enshrined them in Cologne Cathedral, elevating them to the status of kings.
Okay, so the three kings are like a medieval invention.
Pretty much.
It's fascinating how these stories evolve over time. Now, we can't talk about the wise men without mentioning the star.
Right.
What's the astronomical and historical significance of the Star of Bethlehem?
Well, stars held immense importance in ancient cultures. They were seen as signs, omens, celestial guides,
Right.
astronomy and astrology. They were intertwined.
And the Star of Bethlehem was no exception.
Right.
It was more than just a pretty light in the sky.
There are theories about its astronomical identity.
Right.
Perhaps a comet, given that a significant one appeared around 4 BCE.
Right.
But the star also serves, a brilliant narrative purpose. It cleverly subverts Roman propaganda.
Right.
Remember how Emperor Augustus used a comet to claim divine lineage?
Right.
Matthew's star redirects that focus onto Jesus.
So it's a subtle but powerful challenge to Roman authority. It reframes the entire narrative.
It's saying the real power, the real Son of God is Jesus, not the Roman emperor.
That's a bold statement, especially in a time of Roman rule. Now let's talk about those famous gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Why were those gifts so significant?
Those gifts are truly at the heart of the story. They represent key aspects of Jesus' life and Matthew's theological message.
Okay. Break it down for us. What did each gift symbolize?
Gold, of course, represents kingship.
Right.
It acknowledges Jesus as a king,
Mhm.
even though, he wasn't born into a royal family. Frankincense, used in religious rituals, signifies his divinity.
Okay.
It recognizes him as the Son of God.
And myrrh.
And myrrh, a resin used for embalming, foreshadows his sacrifice and death,
Right.
pointing towards his ultimate purpose as Savior.
Wow. The symbolism is so rich, and it plays into that subversion of Roman authority we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, these gifts, they challenge that traditional view of power,
Yeah.
and they highlight Jesus' spiritual authority.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
The gifts underscore the idea that Jesus' kingdom, it isn't about, earthly power
Right.
or material wealth.
Yeah.
It's about something much deeper, something spiritual and transformative.
That's a powerful message.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we talk about those early Christian depictions of the wise men in their Persian clothing.
Right.
But how did those depictions change over time? Did the wise men always look the same in art?
As Christianity gained wider acceptance, the artistic representations of the wise men, they became more elaborate, more grand. They were often depicted in, rich robes befitting their elevated status as kings. And their features sometimes reflected the diversity of that expanding Christian world, with artists incorporating elements of, different cultures.
So their image evolved along with the growth of Christianity itself.
Exactly. Think of those stunning mosaics in Ravenna, Italy, for example.
Right.
The wise men are named Melchior, Caspar, and Balthazar.
Oh, wow.
And they're shown in all their Persian splendor, offering their precious gifts to the Christ child. It's a powerful visual testament to the reach and impact of Jesus' message.
It's incredible how art can capture these complex historical and theological ideas. Now, I'm really curious about those alternative versions of the story you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Those apocryphal gospels. What are some of the most intriguing details we find in those texts?
Well, one fascinating detail is the inclusion of more characters in the story. For example, in some versions, the wise men are accompanied by, a large retinue,
Oh, wow.
servants, and even soldiers.
Really?
This adds a sense of grandeur and importance to their journey, emphasizing the significance of their mission.
So it's not just a small band of travelers,
Right.
but a whole procession making its way to Bethlehem.
Exactly. It's like a royal entourage, highlighting the idea that something truly momentous is happening. And in some apocryphal gospels, the wise men don't just, visit baby Jesus and leave.
Right.
They actually stay for a while, interacting with Mary and Joseph, even participating in the young Jesus's life.
Wow, that changes the whole dynamic of the story.
Yeah.
It's not just a brief encounter, but a more extended relationship.
Yes. And it allows for further exploration of the wise men's characters, their individual personalities,
Right.
and their motivations for seeking out Jesus.
I'm starting to see how these apocryphal gospels provide a whole different lens through which to view the Christmas story. They add layers of detail and nuance that we just don't find in the canonical gospels.
Absolutely. They offer a glimpse into that diversity of early Christian thought.
Right.
And the different ways in which people, and interpreted and understood the significance of Jesus's birth.
So they're not just interesting historical curiosities, but valuable sources for understanding the development of, Christian beliefs and traditions.
Precisely. They offer valuable insights into the evolution of Christian thought and practice. And they remind us that even the most familiar stories can hold hidden depths and surprising perspectives.
That's a great point. It challenges us to dig deeper, to question our assumptions,
Yeah.
to be open to new interpretations. But before we wrap up, there's one more thing I'm curious about. You mentioned earlier that the wise men were Zoroastrians,
Right,
not Christians.
right.
And yet their story is so central to this Christian narrative. Why is that?
That's a question that has intrigued scholars for centuries. And I think the answer lies in the interconnectedness of these, ancient belief systems. Zoroastrianism, with its emphasis on good and evil, a single God, and a coming savior.
Right.
It had a profound influence on both Judaism and Christianity.
So Matthew might have been intentionally drawing on those shared themes to create a more universal message, one that resonated with both Jewish and Gentile audiences.
Exactly. He was demonstrating that Jesus' message was for everyone, not just a select few.
Right.
And what better way to do that than by including these wise and revered figures from a different religious tradition?
It's a brilliant storytelling strategy. It subtly undermines the idea of religious exclusivity and highlights that universal appeal of Jesus' message.
And it also speaks to the historical reality of the time.
Right.
The Roman Empire was a melting pot of cultures and religions.
Yeah.
And early Christianity was emerging within that, diverse context, drawing on influences from various traditions.
So the story of the wise men isn't just a charming Christmas tale.
Right.
It's a reflection of the complex historical and religious landscape of the time.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that even the most familiar stories can hold hidden depths and surprising connections.
Well said. Sounds like we need to do a whole deep dive on Zoroastrianism sometime.
Aha, yeah.
But for now, let's shift gears and talk about those 12 wise men from the Syrian tradition.
Okay.
What can we learn from their story?
That's a great transition. The Syrian tradition of 12 wise men is a fascinating one.
Yeah.
It expands on that familiar narrative,
Okay.
offering a richer tapestry of characters and interpretations.
Okay. Tell me more. Who are these 12 wise men and what makes their story unique?
Well, in this tradition, the 12 wise men represent the 12 tribes of Israel,
Oh, wow.
symbolizing the gathering of all of Israel to recognize Jesus as the Messiah. Each wise man brings a unique gift, representing those diverse talents and offerings of the people.
That's a beautiful image. It suggests a broader acceptance of Jesus' message, extending beyond those traditional boundaries of Judaism.
Exactly. And it reinforces the idea that Jesus' kingdom is inclusive,
Yeah.
welcoming people from all walks of life and all backgrounds. It's a powerful message of unity and reconciliation.
It's amazing how these alternative versions of the story just enrich our understanding of the Christmas narrative.
Mm.
They challenge us to think beyond the familiar
Right.
and to explore those diverse ways in which people have interpreted and experienced the significance of Jesus' birth.
Yeah, absolutely. They remind us that the Christmas story isn't, static or monolithic.
Right.
It's a living, breathing narrative that continues to evolve and inspire us in new and unexpected ways.
It really is remarkable how much depth and complexity there is to this story.
Hmm.
It's so much more than just, a simple nativity scene with a few wise men bearing gifts.
You're absolutely right. The story of the wise men, it's like a tapestry
Yeah.
woven from history, faith, and culture. And like any good tapestry, it reveals new patterns and meanings the closer you look.
Okay, so we've explored the historical context, the symbolism of the gifts, the evolution of the wise men's image in art,
Right.
and even those intriguing apocryphal gospels.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we should consider before we wrap up?
Well, we can't forget that human element of the story,
Yeah.
These wise men, regardless of how many there were or where they came from, they embarked on this, long and arduous journey
Right.
driven by their faith and
Yeah.
a thirst for knowledge.
Right.
They were seeking something greater than themselves, something that would give their lives meaning, purpose.
That's a really important point. It reminds us that the wise men weren't just like passive observers. They were active seekers, driven by this deep yearning for truth and understanding.
Exactly. And their journey, in all its variations and interpretations, it resonates with our own human desire to, find our place in the world, to seek those answers to life's big questions, to connect with something larger than ourselves.
I think that's a powerful takeaway for our listeners. The wise men's journey, whether we view it literally or metaphorically, can inspire us to kind of embark on our own journeys of discovery, to challenge our assumptions, and to be open to, new perspectives.
Absolutely. And to remember that the search for truth and meaning is often a journey, not a destination.
Right.
It's about the questions we ask, the paths we choose, and the lessons we learn along the way.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the story of the wise men, what's the most important insight you hope our listeners take away from our conversation?
I think the key takeaway is that invitation to question our assumptions.
Right.
We often accept those familiar narratives
Yeah.
without digging deeper, without considering those alternative perspectives or exploring the historical and cultural context.
Right.
But like the wise men themselves, we're called to be seekers, to challenge what we think we know, to be open to new discoveries.
Like finding our own stars to follow.
Exactly. And who knows what, amazing insights and revelations await us on that journey.
Well said. We'll have links in the show notes to some of the resources we discussed today, including The Revelation of the Magi. It's a fascinating read, and I highly recommend checking it out. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into a completely different topic. Until then, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.